63, Michael believed he had finally found the safest place for his retirement money. It was cash. After decades of watching markets rise, fall, recover, and fall again, he no longer wanted surprises. So every time an investment matured or a position was sold, he moved a little more money into cash. At first, the change felt responsible. Then the cash balance reached $100,000, then $200,000, then $300,000. His wife Laura liked seeing that number too. It made retirement feel tangible. It made the next grocery bill, the next property tax payment, and the next unexpected repair feel manageable. But one evening, they asked a question that sounded almost ridiculous. Could having too much cash actually make retirement less secure? That question is harder than it looks. Cash is one of the most useful tools in retirement. It can also become one of the most misunderstood. The mistake is not holding cash. The mistake is holding cash without knowing what job that cash is supposed to do. Retirement changes the meaning of liquidity. While you are working, your paycheck usually refills your checking account. When you retire, that automatic refill may become smaller, less frequent, or disappear entirely. Your portfolio may suddenly have to help pay for ordinary life. That makes cash feel more important than it did before. And in many ways, it is. Cash can pay bills without forcing you to sell an investment on a bad day. Cash can cover a broken furnace without turning the repair into a portfolio decision. Cash can give you time when markets are falling and headlines are frightening. Cash can also help you sleep at night. Those are real benefits. But cash is not designed to do every job in a retirement plan. It is especially weak at one job. That job is funding decades of future purchasing power all by itself. Cash and cash equivalents generally offer more stability than stocks and bonds, but their long-term return potential is also lower. That trade-off matters because retirement is not just a one-year problem. For many people, retirement is a 20-year, 25-year, or even 30-year financial journey. The money you do not need soon may still need to grow. So the useful question is not whether cash is good or bad. The useful question is how much cash has a clear purpose in your retirement plan. There is no universal percentage that answers that question. 10% might be excessive for one retiree and dangerously low for another. 20% might be perfectly reasonable in one household and unnecessarily conservative in the next. The percentage alone tells us almost nothing. To see why, imagine two retirees who each have $1 million of investable assets. The first retiree receives enough guaranteed monthly income to cover almost every essential expense. The second retiree depends heavily on portfolio withdrawals to pay for housing, food, insurance, travel, and healthcare. If both keep 10% of their portfolio in cash, they each have $100,000. But those identical cash balances do not provide the same protection. For the first retiree, $100,000 might represent several years of portfolio-funded spending. For the second retiree, it might cover only a fraction of that time. The better starting point is not portfolio size. The better starting point is the gap between what you spend and what reliable income already covers. Suppose Michael and Laura expect to spend about $78,000 during a typical retirement year. Suppose their combined Social Security and pension income will cover about $48,000 of that amount. Their portfolio does not need to provide $78,000 every year. Their starting portfolio spending gap is closer to $30,000. That $30,000 gap is more useful than a percentage when they begin thinking about cash. If they keep $90,000 specifically to support ordinary portfolio withdrawals, they have roughly 3 years of that spending gap. If they keep $300,000 for the same purpose, they have roughly 10 years of that gap. That does not automatically make $90,000 right. It does not automatically make $300,000 wrong. But now the cash balance means something. We have connected the money to a job. That is the first principle of retirement cash planning. Give every dollar of cash a reason to exist. One part may be for routine spending. Another part may be for emergencies. Another part may be for a purchase you already know is coming. Another part may exist to reduce the chance that you will need to sell investments during a severe market decline. Those are different jobs. They should not be mixed together without thought. Consider a retiree who says, "I keep $200,000 in cash for safety." The next question should be, safety from what? If $50,000 is for a new roof and a replacement car within the next 2 years, that money has a clear short-term purpose. If another $30,000 is the household emergency reserve, that money also has a clear job. If $60,000 is intended to cover 2 years of the portfolio spending gap, that money has a planning purpose too. But if the remaining $60,000 has no purpose beyond a general fear of investing, the conversation changes. That final portion may not be a reserve. It may simply be long-term money sitting in a short-term vehicle. This distinction matters because cash solves one set of risks while creating exposure to another set. The first risk cash helps manage is forced selling. Imagine that the stock market falls sharply during Michael and Laura's second year of retirement. Their electric bill does not fall because the market fell. Their insurance premiums do not wait for a recovery. Their refrigerator does not care what the stock market is doing. Life keeps asking for money. If every dollar they need must come from investments, a downturn can force them to sell assets at depressed prices. Selling after a decline does more than lock in a loss on those shares. It also removes those shares from the portfolio before a possible recovery. That is one reason the order of investment returns can matter so much once withdrawals begin. Two retirees can experience similar average returns over many years and still have very different outcomes if the bad years arrive at different times. A cash buffer cannot eliminate market risk. It can sometimes give a retiree more flexibility about when to sell investments. That flexibility is valuable. But there is a trap hidden inside that logic. If some cash is helpful, it is tempting to assume that more cash must always be safer. That is where short-term safety can begin to conflict with long-term security. The first hidden cost is inflation. Inflation does not usually make cash disappear. It changes what the cash can buy. A bank balance can look stable, while its purchasing power slowly changes. Imagine a purely illustrative case in which cash earns 2% per year, while inflation averages 3% per year. In that example, the money is growing in nominal dollars but losing ground in real purchasing power. Over 20 years, that 1 percentage point annual gap compounds into a meaningful reduction in what the money can buy. This is not a forecast of future cash yields or future inflation. It is simply a way to understand the mechanism. The second hidden cost is opportunity cost. Money kept for next month's bills does not need to maximize long-term growth. Money kept for a roof replacement next year does not need to behave like a long-term investment. But money that will not be needed for 15 or 20 years has a different job. If that long-term money remains permanently in cash, it gives up the possibility of higher long-term returns from other assets. Higher potential return comes with higher risk. That trade-off cannot be removed. The important point is that avoiding visible market volatility does not mean avoiding all financial risk. It means choosing a different mix of risks. The third hidden cost is longevity risk. Retirement safety is not only about surviving the next bear market. It is also about maintaining resources late in life. A 62-year-old who plans only for the next 5 years may feel wonderfully safe with a very large cash position. But the same person may still need money at 82, 87, or beyond. A plan that sacrifices too much growth early can make those later years harder to fund. That is why the word safe can be misleading. Cash can be safe from short-term price swings. It is not automatically safe from inflation. It is not automatically safe from lost growth. It is not automatically safe from the risk of a very long retirement. Retirement planning is a balancing problem. You are balancing the risk of needing money soon against the risk of needing purchasing power much later. The balance changes from person to person. It also changes over time. This is why Michael and Laura should not begin by asking what percentage of their portfolio belongs in cash. They should begin by mapping their cash needs. The first layer is spending cash. This is the money that keeps normal life running. It covers the difference between incoming retirement income and near-term household spending. The amount depends on how frequently income arrives and how the household prefers to manage bills. The second layer is emergency cash. This is for events that are possible but not scheduled. A major home repair is one example. An unexpected family need is another. The purpose is not to predict the emergency. The purpose is to avoid turning every surprise into an urgent investment sale. The third layer is planned purchase cash. This category is often forgotten. Retirement frequently includes large expenses that are not emergencies at all. You may know the roof is nearing the end of its useful life. You may know a car will probably need to be replaced. You may be planning a large trip for a family anniversary. You may have a tax payment or home project coming within a known time frame. Money for a known near-term purchase should not be confused with money intended for long-term growth. The fourth layer is the portfolio buffer. This is the part most people mean when they talk about keeping cash for a market downturn. Its job is to create flexibility. If markets are weak, the retiree may be able to use some of this reserve rather than selling as many volatile assets immediately. That does not mean the retiree should try to predict every market peak and bottom. It means the household has more than one source of near-term liquidity. Now we can return to Michael and Laura. They have $300,000 in cash. At first, the number sounds conservative but reasonable. Then they assign jobs to it. $30,000 is for routine portfolio-funded spending over the coming year. $35,000 is reserved for a car they expect to replace soon. $25,000 is set aside for a roof and other homework. $30,000 is their emergency reserve. Another $60,000 is intended as an additional spending buffer. That accounts for $180,000. The remaining $120,000 has no scheduled purpose. Michael simply says he feels better seeing it in cash. That feeling matters. A retirement plan that causes constant anxiety is not a good plan merely because a spreadsheet likes it. But comfort has a price too. The right question is whether Michael needs all $120,000 in cash to achieve that comfort. Maybe he does. Maybe he does not. What matters is that the decision becomes conscious. He can now compare the emotional value of the extra cash with the financial cost of keeping long-term money out of growth assets. That is a better decision than choosing a round percentage because someone on the internet said retirees should hold it. There is another reason simple cash percentages can be misleading. Not all retirement income is equally predictable. A household with a substantial pension may need less portfolio liquidity for basic living expenses. A household that depends mainly on withdrawals may need more flexibility. A retiree with a large mortgage may have a different cash flow profile than someone whose housing costs are low. A retiree who plans to help an adult child next year may have a known cash need that another household does not. A retiree facing a major home renovation may temporarily hold far more cash than usual. A retiree with several years before claiming Social Security may also have a temporary spending gap that later becomes smaller. The correct cash balance can therefore change even when the portfolio balance barely moves. This is why retirement cash should be reviewed as a system, not as a permanent percentage. There is also an important psychological dimension. Some retirees hold extra cash because they remember a painful market crash. Some hold extra cash because they have never had to spend from investments before. Some hold extra cash because a large bank balance feels more real than a diversified portfolio. Some hold extra cash because they fear becoming a burden on their children. These concerns should not be mocked. Behavior matters because a technically efficient portfolio is useless if the owner abandons it during the first frightening market decline. A reasonable cash reserve can help some retirees stay disciplined. But a fear-based reserve should still have boundaries. Otherwise, the reserve can grow every time the market becomes uncomfortable. 100,000 becomes 150,000. 150 becomes 200,000. Soon the household has changed its entire investment strategy without ever deciding to do so. Cash accumulation can become asset allocation by accident. That is not the same as having a plan. Another common mistake is to build a cash reserve without deciding how it will be refilled. Suppose Michael and Laura spend $60,000 from their reserve during a weak market. What happens next? Do they immediately sell investments to restore the cash balance? Do they wait for a scheduled portfolio review? Do they refill only after strong market periods? Do they reduce discretionary spending temporarily? Do they use interest, dividends, bond maturities, or other cash flows as part of the refill process? There is no single rule that fits every household. But a reserve without a refill rule is incomplete. If you constantly sell investments just to restore a large cash target, the reserve can begin controlling the portfolio instead of serving it. The cash plan should support the retirement plan. The retirement plan should not exist merely to keep the cash bucket full. Taxes can also affect these decisions. Moving money from one account to another may create tax consequences depending on the account type and the transaction. A dollar in a bank account is not always economically interchangeable with a dollar inside a tax-deferred retirement account. That is another reason a cash target should not be implemented mechanically. The location of the cash can matter as much as the amount. For some households, professional tax or financial advice can be valuable before making large changes. Now consider the opposite mistake. Suppose a retiree decides that cash is inefficient and keeps almost none. Every bill is covered by selling investments as needed. In a calm market, that can feel perfectly efficient. Then several things happen at once. Stocks fall. A large home repair arrives. A family member needs help. The retiree becomes nervous and sells more than planned. The problem was not that the retiree failed to maximize returns. The problem was a lack of liquidity at the exact moment flexibility became valuable. So this video is not an argument for minimizing cash. It is an argument for intentional cash. The goal is enough liquidity to protect near-term decisions without turning decades of future spending into a giant cash pile. One useful way to think about this is to separate time horizons. Money needed very soon has a different job from money that may not be needed for many years. The closer the spending need, the more important stability and liquidity become. The farther away the need, the more room there may be to accept some volatility in pursuit of growth. That principle sounds simple. Applying it requires knowing what your future spending actually looks like. Start with the next 12 months. How much will your household spend? How much of that spending will be covered by predictable income? What remains for the portfolio to cover? Then look at known large purchases over the next few years. Separate those from emergencies. Then decide how much additional buffer would help you avoid making forced decisions during a bad market. Only after those jobs are funded should you look at the remaining cash. Ask what that remaining money is for. If the answer is nothing specific, you have found the part of the cash position worth examining. That does not mean it must be invested tomorrow. It means the money deserves a deliberate decision. There is one more complication. Cash itself is not a single product. Checking accounts, savings accounts, certificates of deposit, treasury bills, money market deposit accounts, and money market funds can behave differently in liquidity, yield, guarantees, and access. The label cash can therefore hide important details. A reserve that cannot be accessed when needed may fail at its job. A reserve that earns very little for many years may have a larger inflation cost. A reserve spread across different vehicles may require more organization but may serve different time horizons better. The correct design depends on the household. The central idea stays the same. Cash should be matched to purpose. Now imagine Michael and Laura revisiting their $300,000 balance. Instead of asking whether 25% cash is too high, they ask 4 questions. What will we need in the next year? What known large expenses are coming soon? How much emergency liquidity helps us feel secure? How much additional buffer do we want against being forced to sell investments during a downturn? Those questions lead them to a number. The number may be higher than a textbook rule. It may be lower. But it is now connected to their life. Then they ask a 5th question. What job does every dollar above that number have? This is where the retirement conversation becomes more honest. If the answer is long-term growth, keeping that money permanently in cash may not match the job. If the answer is emotional security, they can decide how much that security is worth to them. If the answer is an expense 5 years away, they can choose an appropriate place for money with that horizon in mind. If the answer is simply, I do not know, then the money is not really part of a strategy yet. That is the difference between having cash and having a cash plan. A cash plan does not promise that markets will behave. It does not eliminate uncertainty. It does not tell you exactly how long you will live. It does not tell you exactly what inflation will be. It does not guarantee that an emergency will arrive at a convenient time. What it does is assign different tools to different problems. Cash handles near-term liquidity. Other assets can take responsibility for other goals, including income, stability, and long-term growth. The mix will vary. That variation is not a flaw. It is the entire point. A 70-year-old with a paid-off home, a pension, and modest spending does not have the same cash need as a 60-year-old who retired early and is drawing heavily from a portfolio. A single retiree does not have the same risks as a couple with 2 income streams. A household planning a major move does not have the same near-term cash needs as a household planning to stay put. Rules of thumb can start a conversation. They should not end it. So how much cash is too much in retirement? It is too much when a meaningful portion of the cash no longer has a short-term job, yet remains there for years only because every alternative feels uncomfortable. It may also be too much when the desire to avoid all visible volatility begins to threaten long-term purchasing power or portfolio longevity. And it may be too little when ordinary spending or predictable surprises can force you to sell investments at a time you would rather not sell. The answer lives between those two risks. For Michael and Laura, the breakthrough was not finding the perfect cash percentage. It was realizing that safety has more than one definition. There is the safety of paying next month's bills. There is the safety of surviving a market decline without panic. There is the safety of maintaining purchasing power. There is the safety of having enough resources if retirement lasts much longer than expected. A good retirement plan tries to respect all of them. Before you decide whether your cash balance is too high or too low, stop looking at the percentage for a moment. Write down the jobs your cash must perform. Estimate the spending gap your portfolio needs to cover. List the large expenses you already know are coming. Decide what emergency reserve helps you remain calm and flexible. Think about how your cash would be used during a difficult market. Then decide how that reserve would eventually be replenished. Finally, look at every dollar left over. Ask whether it is waiting for a real near-term need or simply waiting because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. That single question can reveal more than a generic cash rule ever will. Retirement cash should not be a monument to fear. It should be a working part of a larger plan. Enough cash can give you time, flexibility, and confidence. Too little can make a bad year more dangerous. Too much can quietly make a long retirement harder to fund. The goal is not maximum cash. The goal is useful cash. Give every retirement dollar a job, and make sure the job matches the time when you will actually need the money.